Good morning. Thank you for joining the Environmental Stewardship Program 8.0. You will be hearing from our excellent lineup of speakers today. Climate change is the story of declining carbon sinks, which lead to climate disaster. Three reasons stand out: declining sinks, increasing disasters, and microgrids as a solution to making communities more resilient and reliable. You can see here the Keeling curve is proof that almost nothing is happening to change the climate crisis. Note that the temperature is rising at a faster rate every 15 years. Currently, it's at around 2.5 ppm per year that it's rising, and it's likely to go to 3 ppm per year next. CO2 is an exhaust gas of burning fossil fuels. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing because carbon sinks are declining. One reason is our continued burning of fossil fuels. The other is the land use changes that result from development and extraction. The Keeling curve needs to bend back in order for us to have a safe and productive future. Carbon sinks are natural systems that accumulate carbon containing chemical compounds for an indefinite period and thereby remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Oceans, forests, grasslands, wetlands, and the soil are our major carbon sinks. All are declining in their ability to store carbon, resulting in increased carbon concentrations in the atmosphere. As sinks decline through an economic process called externalities, feedback loops like the release of methane and methane hydrates accelerate climate change. We can measure atmospheric CO2, but not atmospheric methane. So we don't really know how badly our sinks are declining. For all of human history, from the entrance of Neanderthals through Australopithecus, the safe zone has been between 250 and 300 ppm of CO2. 280 is the ideal concentration, a time when we competed with cave bears, cave lions, cave hyenas, and other large predators. This was the world of functioning sinks. The established wisdom today will tell us that this safe level is 350 to 450 ppm of CO2. Fossil fuel companies will say even higher, 500 probably. You can see as on the Keeling curve that at 350, our choices are between bad and worse. By selling us comfort, less than 200 fossil fuel companies and banks get almost $1 trillion in profits and subsidies. And they run our policies through programs like Citizens United. Last year, total profits were expected to exceed $400 billion. Profits like this bring little hope of driving down carbon emissions. Sinks decline with land use changes. Once lush landscapes have had their wetlands and forest, grasslands, etc., drained for agriculture and housing. You can see here that the centralized road system and the power lines radiate into carbon sinks, leading to their decline. The degraded systems, as you've heard from the prior slide, is incredibly profitable. Fires today are caused by power lines and roads fueled by the increasing power of the wind because of rising carbon concentrations. In general, disasters like fires, floods, dams, and levee collapses, hurricanes, are exponentially worse with the rising climate. Microgrids are an alternative to power outages. Renewable microgrids considerably reduce impacts on the sinks, and they reduce emissions. Microgrids, by distributing power, are more resilient and reliable. Microgrids, especially public microgrids, should be the basis of a future distributed system. We know the problem is declining sinks. A distributed grid powered by microgrids will ensure a livable future for our grandchildren. A better world powered by renewables with green jobs for all can result in a healthy biosphere for all. Good morning and welcome to the 8th edition of the Environmental Stewardship Program. Our first speaker will talk about using power to bend the Keeling curve. An alternative to monopoly corporations is possible, literally, power to the people via microgrids. Without energy democracy and justice, we will never be able to save our sinks. We need communities to be justly invested and compensated in our future. Al Weinrub is the author of the book Energy Democracy and a recent paper on energy justice. He has a PhD in applied physics from Harvard and a BS in engineering physics from Cornell. Please welcome Al Weinrub.
Thank you, Gladwyn. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the folks that are attending this particular session, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words to kick it off. As Gladwyn sort of indicated, that most of the things that I think about and I talk about as the coordinator of the California Alliance for Community Energy really has to do with the moment of history that we are in here, in which there are different roads that we can travel moving into the future. And Gladwyn sort of has already alluded to this, and I'm not talking, and I'm talking about a renewable energy future. Clearly, if our future is a fossil fuel future, there's no future. So there's not a whole lot to say about that. But then the question is, what is the alternative to a fossil fuel future? And oftentimes it's basically referred to as a transitioning to a renewable energy future. However, there's a huge amount of contention about what that future looks like. There are different models at play that are in high contention right now. In fact, the one that we are living under right now, what we call a utility-focused centralized energy model, which was pictured by Gladwyn in the early slides as the huge transmission lines that carry remotely generated energy, to our communities, sort of a one directional supply of commodity electricity to users through transmission lines, with the extraction of wealth and power flowing in the other direction, to the folks who develop, own, and create the energy as a commodity to serve their needs to accumulate capital and remain in existence as the authoritative designers of our energy system. And that model, the centralized energy model that I'm talking about, is pretty much a totalitarian model in California. I think people are probably pretty aware of that it's dominated by powerful economic interests who make the decisions that affect our energy future, and without much reference at all to what our needs are as a community, as communities, to survive and prosper on the earth, or the need for the earth to be able to be a sink for carbon, or to be able to basically be able to manage, a biosphere that's survivable for us and for other species. So that is our current model, which is now, as a result of climate change and the fact that many citizens are actively engaged in thinking about energy issues, is being contested by a very different model. And that's the model that's more democratic, in which decisions about energy resources and their development, renewable energy resources and their development, are made locally in order to meet the needs of communities. The needs for them to meet their energy needs, the needs for them to survive economically, and the needs for them to live in an environment in which they can survive the climate crisis and be even able to prosper. And that model is called a decentralized energy model. And it is intrinsically different in almost every way from the centralized energy model. So there is a fight in California that's going on between these two very, very different development models. And what happens in the next few years is going to have a huge impact on whether we and everybody else, other living organisms, survive, on the planet or not. And that's all within the context of assuming renewable energy as a solution. So I just wanted to just sort of introduce my remarks with that conflict, and perhaps I can say a few words more about it afterwards. But I feel an obligation to say something about microgrids because, as Gladwyn mentioned, many people look at this technology as an important aspect of which road we take moving forward. So I don't want to make any assumptions about what people know or understand about microgrids. So let me say a few things about microgrids and what they are by way of introduction. And then a few words about what's given rise to the active interest in microgrids over the last couple of years. And then within that context, talk about the role of microgrids in terms of this classic historical battle that's taking place in California, which will have ramifications for the rest of the country and even potentially the world. So I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying some, simple things about microgrids, but I do want to sort of lay some framework. So the notion of microgrids is the idea of energy resources that are connected behind a switch of some sort that allows that system of resources to be isolated from the distribution grid or whatever grid it's connected to. So when I say resources, I'm talking about many kinds of resources. The one we think about a lot are resources like energy generating resources like, say, PV solar. But we also talk a lot, at least recently, about storage resources. There's energy efficiency resources. And there are other resources that are actually can be used to reduce demand and whatnot. So there's a set of resources that are generally called distributed energy resources. And they're called distributed energy resources because they actually exist locally in local communities and can be harnessed in ways to address the energy needs of any kind of community. Now, in a microgrid then is some combination of these resources that are located on a customer's side of a switch that allows those resources to be isolated from the grid. And what a microgrid, can be in many sizes and shapes. On the simplest level, it's perhaps a building that has a meter, and in front of the meter is the switch, this isolation switch. So it could have some generation capabilities, some solar panels and some storage and some other connectivities and whatnot. But a microgrid, and that's usually called a single customer microgrid, but even single customer microgrids could involve many buildings and interconnected resources that are in different buildings, for example, all connected by local wiring. And we could think of this as sort of a campus microgrid type of situation, sort of similar to a college campus or a medical campus or other campuses like that. So that's already a much larger kind of microgrid, but also sort of the mode of a single customer microgrid. However, you could have resources that are owned by individual customers, but actually they're interconnected through the distribution grid. And those are called multi-customer microgrids because it relies on PG&E and other utilities to connect those resources together. And then those could be thought of more as like a neighborhood microgrid or a block microgrid or even a community microgrid, and you can go up in scale and size But the basic notion is to pull together resources that could actually serve to stand alone at a time when the grid is not functioning. So I want to move from that sort of basic understanding of microgrids at many sizes and dimensions and configurations to talking about, what has sort of driven, the imperative for microgrid development. And I think everybody here is probably aware of what happened in 2018 and 2019 when we find the first clear instance the failure of the centralized energy model that I talked about a little bit earlier, because basically the antiquated transmission system that PG&E and some of the other utilities was running, sparked forest fires that destroyed communities, actually murdered, hundreds of people, created a huge amount of damage and whatnot, due to the fact that they had not been maintained in any reasonable way, caused these fires. So that was one of the things that happened in 2018 that shut off power for people across the state massively. And then that was followed by a massive wave of utility power shutoffs, in which the utility actually just shut off power to many people across the state. And so pervasive was this, and so problematic was this in terms of denying people basic electricity, that it gave rise to a call for microgrids in order to protect people from the actions of the monopoly utilities who owned the transmission system and ran the distribution system. So this is like what drove interest in microgrids in 2018 and 2019 largely came out of the basic failure of the system we had to provide safe, reliable, and affordable power to the people of California. These are the three criteria that had been set for the by the California Public Utilities Commission as the basis for regulating the monopoly utilities, was that those were the objectives. And right from the get-go, the questions of safe and reliable power were shown to be huge failures of this system. And so this is largely because that system depends on a transmission system, which is a single point of failure that can affect hundreds of thousands of people at the same time. And the power shutoffs suffer from the same problem, which is it's a single point of failure, namely the failure of the investor-owned utilities, which can result in the shutoff of power of hundreds of thousands of people, all at the same time. So that was the impetus, I think, largely for people thinking about microgrids as a response to the fact that many people, and predominantly people without resources, were losing power, and it was really affecting their ability to survive and live. But if you look back before this happened, the notion of a microgrid had existed for some time, and this notion is that actually there were huge advantages, whether power is shut off from the grid or not, building systems in which you get renewable resources together in a way that really optimizes them strongly. So the notion of a microgrid, as I mentioned before, which was of combining resources, that are able to basically match for whatever size microgrid you're talking about, the supply of electricity with the need, with the demand that exists on the one hand, and to be able to match the need with the supply that exists. So it's this notion of using renewable energy resources to achieve net zero, whatever, whether it's a net zero building or a net zero campus, a net zero neighborhood, a net zero community, whatever, a notion of really the optimal use renewable energy resources that accommodates the fact that these are intermittent resources, but that the technologies exist to mend them together and in such a way as to really dramatically reduce costs, allow flexibility, and to meet the needs of whatever size entity that we're talking about. So that need, where you have local resources developed to optimize the electricity system to meet local needs, has been around for quite some time, goes way back to Amory Lovins many years ago, who talked about the ability to have a flexible approach to meeting energy and electricity needs. So what this is really saying is that what a microgrid represents is a combination of resources that really reduces even the need for the distribution system. In some of the microgrids I'm talking about, they do need a distribution system for sure to connect different resources. But the notion is that a microgrid can be seen as sort of the elemental building block of a different kind of alternative energy model, a decentralized energy system, where you piece together energy resources as needed by a community in a way that really optimizes and reduces costs and provides a whole load of other real benefits. So the physical configuration of a decentralized energy model looks really quite different from the centralized energy model, and that it's composed of many entities that are producing and consuming energy, but who can share that energy with neighbors, with other people that they are in interconnection with. And so you're really talking about a two-way flow of electricity to and from consumers. They're called prosumers, I guess, in this way of thinking. So the physical configuration and architecture of an energy system is really very different from this one-way, one-directional flow of commodity production that I talked about earlier, to one in which you have a notion of energy as something that meets human needs, not commodity production needs, and one in which there's a real sharing of resources to optimize a number of criteria, which I'll talk about. But it's also an extremely different socioeconomic model, basically in which the decision-making and the power to make those decisions and the authority to enforce those decisions is not focused in a narrow band of energy oligarchs, who basically run the system to meet the needs of Wall Street. But the notion that you have a socioeconomic model in which many, many players can be participants in the production and distribution of energy and energy resources in a way to meet other criteria. So if you just look at the criteria needed by our communities, these largely are a criteria that have to do with the safe, reliable, and affordable energy, which I had mentioned earlier, where safe and reliable are the kind of resources we're talking about. But when we talk about affordable, that becomes now a really important element, because as we all know, that what's happened in recent years is skyrocketing costs of energy in California, and this is largely because of the failures of the transmission system and the costs that are being imposed on ratepayers in order to try to upgrade or address those failures. But with the advent of climate change, we have additional criteria that must be met, with a centralized energy model can't even begin to address. So one is resilience, which is what we talk about a lot when we talk about microgrids, the ability to survive and to continue on when the grid gets shut down, but also the whole notion of sustainable energy production that actually matches our energy needs, our energy footprint, with the capacity of the biosphere to be able to support that for future generations. And most recently, also, the need for communities to be able to have equitable access to energy resources, to have a real sense of energy justice is a goal, is a need that can only be met when communities can control their resources in a way to address the need for more justice and participation by all sectors of our society. These are just energy needs that I'm talking about, which only a decentralized energy model can address. And that's not even to address the other kinds of needs that communities have, which has to do with sustainable economic development, wealth building in our communities, jobs, health standards, and other things that are all local in nature and dependent on the ability of communities to make decisions about their energy resources. So in that sense, what a microgrid represents and what microgrid technology represents is the potential building block for a whole new energy model, a decentralized energy model, which is focused on the maximum utilization of distributed energy resources as determined by communities to meet their local needs. And that's really what I would say is the importance of microgrids. Because, I mean, let's face it, Google, other institutions in our society, they have the wealth and power to create microgrids. There's no question about that, and they're doing it all the time. There are many microgrids that exist in California, but the ability of microgrids to actually serve the needs of our communities, this has not been realized at all. And I don't want to go into it in detail, but that is certainly the case. And largely because the centralized energy model does not meet the needs of communities of low-income people and people of color is largely the explanation for why the movement in this country to decarbonize has so little power, because the centralized energy model only creates problems of a different kind for low-income communities and communities of color. It doesn't achieve any kind of energy justice. What it really does is accentuate the impact of climate change in a very negative way. So the historic battle that's going on in California right now is the conflict between a centralized and decentralized energy model. And we see it every day. We see it with the attack on rooftop solar. We see it with the attack by the utilities and the CPUC and the governor on rooftop solar. We see it with the attack on microgrid development without going into detail. We see it with efforts to regionalize CAISO and move control of energy resources even outside our state, as opposed to into our communities. We see it with a continual propagation of nuclear power as any kind of alternative that makes sense, especially when it's located on fault lines. And I can go down the list. It's represented by the fact that we pay for transmission access when we don't even need transmission lines to deliver our electricity. So there are many issues and where this fight is taking place and where we as communities are getting slaughtered by the folks who run this centralized energy model. And so this is a call basically for our communities to take a much stronger role in terms of being able to push for the kind of energy model that we need. And I apologize for taking so long to say a few what I thought would be introductory comments.
Thank you, Al. We'll move to the next speaker and answer the questions at the end, just so that we can stay on schedule. Our second speaker will show us how power can be democratized and how to get to a world without fossil fuels. However, as Al said, we are renting the fossil fuel power grid for transmitting our power, including if it was renewable. And that infrastructure has become increasingly unreliable with fires, floods, public safety power shutdowns, etc., which leads us back to microgrids. Jan Pepper is the CEO of Peninsula Clean Energy. Jan has earned a BS in civil engineering and an MBA, both from Stanford University, and is a registered professional engineer in California. Please welcome Jan Pepper.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for dedicating your Saturday morning to joining us for this program. And thank you, Gladwyn, for inviting me to participate. I'm going to share some slides here as I go through, talk about what we're doing at Peninsula Clean Energy. And these photos here on this slide, this first one here is a picture of a new 200 megawatt solar project just outside the city of Los Banos in the Central Valley that we caused to be built. And this here is a project, I believe, in the Altamont Pass, a wind project that are centralized energy projects, but we need those as well to meet our energy loads. So what I'm going to talk about today is for those of you who are not familiar with Peninsula Clean Energy, to give a quick overview and why we're in the Central Valley, what our strategic goals are, our plan to be 100% renewable on a 24/7 basis, and then how we're going to use that clean energy to decarbonize transportation and buildings, and then some aggregation programs to use more distributed resources. So most of you probably know that we are the Community Choice Energy program for San Mateo County. We launched in 2016 with the mission to reduce carbon emissions and expand access to sustainable and affordable energy for everyone. We have a 23-member board consisting of every city and town and the county of San Mateo, plus the city of Los Banos. So I have 23 people that are my bosses, and they're a wonderful board, and they're very supportive of the work that we're doing. And then everyone, all residents and businesses, were automatically enrolled in Peninsula Clean Energy when we launched in 2016 and 2017 in San Mateo County, and then in 2022 in Los Banos. Right now, the default product that we offer is 50% renewable, 100% clean. So the renewable is solar, wind, geothermal, and small hydro. The other 50% to make it 100% clean is all large hydro. And since our inception, we've priced the product at 5% less than PG&E. And since 2016, our customers have saved over $107 million by having a lower cost for their generation services. Not only lower cost, but a superior product. And we as an organization have 2 investment grade credit ratings, one from Moody's and one from Fitch. So how it works is that we are the generation provider. We source the electricity that gets put on the grid. PG&E delivers that over their poles and wires, and then customers save money and receive that cleaner, greener electricity. In the Central Valley, we have added Los Banos to Peninsula Clean Energy, and we're hoping to expand further in Merced County. The reason the city of Los Banos was interested in joining us was because of that Wright Solar project, the photo I showed you before, which is located about right here. It's about at the intersection of Highway 152 and Highway 5 as you're going down to LA, if you're driving down that way. And so when we did our groundbreaking there in 2018 for the project, we invited the local folks to come over and see what we were doing. And the mayor there at the time was very interested in learning about CCAs and how the city of Los Banos could receive the electricity from that new project that was being built. So we informed them, educated them about what CCAs were, how they could form their own CCA, how they could join us if they so chose. So they decided to join Peninsula Clean Energy and got a seat on the board. And the way it works to enroll a new jurisdiction is they had to wait another year so that we could prove that we had sufficient resources to serve them. And then they started becoming our customers a year ago, since it is April today. We're continuing to talk to neighboring municipalities there in the Central Valley because most of there's a need for CCAs to be into the Central Valley, and we're hoping we're going to be able to do that as we reach out to more people there. And as I noted, we've saved our customers over $107 million since we started, as well as avoiding a large amount of carbon. So over 1.2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent to over 141 million gallons of gasoline. And so we have two key priorities as an organization. The first is to design a power portfolio that's sourced by 100% renewable energy by 2025, and to try to align supply and demand on a 24/7 basis. The board adopted this strategy, and based on the analysis that we have done and the modeling that we've done, our goal is to be able to match that 100% renewable on a 99% time coincident basis. And we published a paper about this that you can find on our website, peninsulacleanenergy.com, about how we are going to achieve 24/7 renewable energy. And what we've been working on in our organization is developing a model that looks at what our current portfolio is, what additional resources are needed to get to 24/7, and what our procurement strategy needs to be to get there. And I'll go into that a little bit more. The second priority that we have is to contribute to the state's goal to be 100% greenhouse gas free. The state's goal is by 2045. We have accelerated that to 2035, and to focus particularly on buildings and on transportation. So we've done a lot of analysis on the market, the technologies, financing needs. We had a outside advisory group working with us, including some luminaries from the industry. And we've defined some specific actions to maximize decarbonization for buildings and transportation. So when we look at our footprint of the electricity that's being delivered to our customers right now, this heat map shows the carbon content of that electricity. And on the bottom axis, the horizontal axis are the days of the year. So we start from January 1 through December 31, 365 days across the bottom. And then the vertical axis is the hours of the day, the 24 hours of the day. So in this heat map, there's 8,760 pixels representing every hour of the year. And you can see that in the summertime, when there's a lot of solar being generated, that the emissions footprint of what we're delivering is essentially zero. But in the wintertime, in particular, in the nighttime, it's higher because there is less solar being generated in the wintertime, and we're more reliant on the natural gas power plants that are serving the grid. So what are we going to do to change this? So first is to diversify the portfolio of our renewables. And this graph shows the hours of the day along the bottom, 1 to 24 hours. And then the vertical axis is the megawatts of generation that we have to serve the load. The black line is our load, and you can see it's lowest during the middle of the night. It picks up in the morning when people get up to have their breakfast and get ready for the day. It then peaks in the evening when people are home getting their dinner ready and enjoying the evening, and then it goes down in the nighttime. So we need to fill in the area underneath this curve with generation supplies. So we have geothermal here on the bottom in green, in red, which is pretty much a base load resource that runs 24 hours a day. We have some small hydro, which is this narrow light blue band. Wind is shown in the dark blue. The wind picks up most during the night, tends to be less during the middle of the afternoon, and then picks up again in the evening time. And then we have the solar here in yellow, which starts when the sun comes up. It exceeds our load during the afternoon, and then then the sun goes down. So there's the excess solar that's being produced during the day is represented by these lines, these yellow lines. And then because we don't have sufficient renewables to meet the load in the evening hours or the early morning, we're relying on grid energy, which is why that heat map wasn't greener for those hours. So what we're going to do is use energy storage to store the excess solar energy during the daytime, and then discharge that stored energy in the evening and the late night and early morning, so that we can match our demand on an hour-by-hour basis, and we won't be relying at all on grid energy, and will be 100% renewable. Then the third step is to use other distributed resources to change this original load shape to a different load shape, to try to increase the load during the afternoon when solar is available, and decrease it in the evening when the solar is no longer available, by having people charge their cars during the middle of the day, or other things like that. So that's a longer term project, and the impact from that right now is pretty minimal, but over time there will be more resources out there to help us achieve that goal. And then the resulting goal, and what we predict in 2025 when we're matching on an hourly basis, is that this heat map is more green, much more green. And there still are problems in the winter time with the late night and early morning hours, because the amount of solar that's produced in the winter is less than in the summer. So the amount that we can store in the winter time is less, and we're not able to completely meet the needs overnight in the winter time. So we're looking for additional resources to do that. And of course, distributed generation can help with that as well. So we're partnering with our member communities to go 100% GHG free, and as I noted, to electrify transportation and buildings. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing there. So this provides more detail on what the program initiatives are that we're doing. And we're working with member communities to pass REACH codes so that new construction will be all electric, and we're working on communities to consider having REACH codes for existing construction. On the transportation side, we are providing incentives for people to get used EVs. We're putting a lot of resources into installing 3,500 EV charging stations in the county. We're working with our local communities to electrify their municipal fleets, and providing rebates for electric bikes, and working with Lyft to get electric vehicles for ride hailing. On the distributed resources side, I'll talk in a moment about the program we have with our municipal partners to provide solar and storage on municipal buildings. And then we're starting to look at virtual power plants for residential and commercial use. And we do have a program for solar and storage for residential customers. We have a partnership with Sunrun, so that if someone installs a solar system or already has a solar system, we're providing an incentive to add storage to that system so that they can be more resilient when the power goes out, and when the power is on for the overall transmission system, that they can better manage their load and be able to store excess solar during the daytime and then draw from their battery in the evening to reduce their bills. Other initiatives that we're working on are looking at vehicle to grid and vehicle to building. To me, if you have an electric vehicle, you have even more storage in the batteries with that vehicle than you have if you were to put a power wall or something like that at your home. And to me, it makes more sense resource-wise to not duplicate the battery storage, to just be able to use your vehicle to plug it into your home and be able to power your home from that when the power goes out. We're also looking at managed charging, and we have a program that's we're going to be accelerating, looking at how do people respond behavior-wise in terms of charging their cars at different times of the day, what kinds of incentives are needed, if any, and we're excited to learn from that. And then another initiative is looking at local storage. Is there a way that we can work with PG&E to isolate certain parts of the distribution system and for us to provide some local storage so that if there is a PSPS event or there's a storm and the grid goes down, that we're able to provide backup so that people still have electricity to manage their homes. And we also had a program a couple of years ago where we provided free portable batteries to income qualified, medically vulnerable people so that they had backup power when the PSPS events were going on so that they could continue to power their medical devices to basically keep them alive. So that was an important program, and we were glad to get that out there. So the program that we're working on right now that I wanted to focus a little bit of time on is our solar and storage on public buildings. So this is to accelerate local renewable energy and resiliency at local government and public facilities. So what we're doing is we're aggregating a number of sites, and in this first cohort of projects, we have about 2 megawatts of solar that we're going to be putting on 12 municipal sites to allow them to have solar. We're contracting for those installations. We have a builder, a contractor called IME, Intermountain, I believe is I hope I'm saying that right. I know the acronym IME. They're a union contractor who will be installing all of those solar systems on those buildings. And then we have put together a power purchase agreement so that we are going to own those solar systems on those buildings and at those sites. And we will sell the power to the municipalities at a reduced rate. So because we're a not-for-profit, we're basically doing everything at cost. By aggregating a large number of sites, we're able to reduce the cost overall for the solar systems. And then also, due to the new legislation passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, we as a government entity can receive the investment tax credit directly through the direct pay provision, which is a 30% investment tax credit, rather than having to put together a fairly complex tax equity setup that was what was required before. So we kind of we're trying to take out a lot of the middle people in this to further reduce costs. And we have pushed to get these in. So all of this first round of projects will be under the NEM 2.0 tariff, and those are going to be starting construction very soon. We're in the midst of collecting or aggregating the second cohort of sites. We've talked to about 120 sites, and I think we're moving forward with maybe 50 or 60 of those candidate sites. We're in the process of doing site surveys with them and getting the interconnection applications into PG&E before April 15th, so that this next cohort of sites can be also under the NEM 2.0. And it's looking like there'll be maybe about 8 megawatts of solar projects. And then for a number of these, we're looking at storage as well. So for this first cohort, there's going to be storage at a few of the buildings. Some of them already have backup generation, and for the time being, they're satisfied with using the backup that they have. But as we go on, we'll continue to look at using more clean storage to provide resilience for these public buildings. So we're looking at municipalities, school districts, wastewater facilities, and locations such as that. So that pretty much concludes what I wanted to cover with you all today. I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A if you'd like to learn more or would like more details on any of the things that I have covered today.
Thanks. Jen, there's one question. Where are the 12 municipal sites located that PCE is aggregating?
Okay, I'll try to remember offhand. I know that there are 2 in Millbrae. I think there's 1 in Brisbane. We've got 2 in Los Banos. They're throughout San Mateo County. I will look that up so that I can answer that later on, or I can put the response in the chat.
Thanks. We have thanks for all those questions coming in. The recording for this event will be provided a week after to all participants, and at that time I will also answer physically all the questions, and they'll be on the website. So keep those questions coming in. Our third speaker has built all kinds of microgrids. He founded the Clean Coalition in 2009 and has over 30 years of experience in policy and technology innovations, including the proliferation of solar microgrids and community microgrids. Craig Lewis has a BSEE from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MSEE and an MBA from USC. Please welcome Craig Lewis.
Pleasure to be here, everybody. I will share my screen, and I've got a presentation. While that's coming up, I will say that I have a multi-decade relationship with the San Mateo County, and have been a happy PCE customer there for many years. And I'm very proud of a lot of the innovation that PCE is bringing to the CCA world. So I have great appreciation for Jan and her deep knowledge in the industry, and her leadership in bringing creative programs to PCE and showing other CCAs how to bring local renewables and resilience and whatnot to the game from the CCA perspective. Okay, so here's my presentation. I've got a lot of slides. I'm going to go very quickly. These slides will be available. They're freely available for distribution without any restriction, and they will also be available on the Clean Coalition website. I'm going to be talking about renewables-driven microgrids and how they are key for future energy systems. I'm going to take a solutions focus, and I'm going to start with some background information I think will be useful. Starting with, for those of you who are not familiar with the Clean Coalition, we are a nonprofit, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And our long-term vision, the end game vision, is we will get to 100% renewables. The only question is it going to take 10 years or 30 years? Obviously, the Clean Coalition's mission is to accelerate that and have it happen on the 10-year side of the spectrum. And when we get there, we believe that 25% of the energy will be sourced from local renewables. And that's really important because that's the only way you can get resilience. You cannot get resilience from remote renewables or any other type of remote generation. But, I just want to emphasize that when I say 25% renewable is going to come from, or 25% of the energy is going to come from local renewables, that means that 75% is still going to come from remote renewables. So a lot of people think the Clean Coalition is trying to get 100% local renewables. We would love that, but we don't think that's realistic. So we think that we can reasonably get to an overall average of 25% of the energy coming from local renewables. And that is our end game vision. And that's what the Clean Coalition fights for every day. Renewables-driven microgrids deliver a trifecta of benefits. The Clean Coalition talks about this trifecta in terms of economic, environmental, and resilience. I just got back from a national conference on schools that was held in Washington, D.C., and I co-presented there with the superintendent for the Santa Barbara Unified School District, who is the superintendent for a school district that the Clean Coalition has facilitated a number of solar microgrids for. And we were on the flight out there to DC, and she said, I think about this trifecta, this economic, environmental, and resilience trifecta. I think of it in terms of savings, sustainability, and safety. And I thought, that's really cool. I like that. So, the savings come in the form of grid efficiency, which saves everybody money, by the way, when you don't have to build as much transmission, for example. And it also, for folks who are doing behind the meter solutions, it provides bill savings. The environmental side, I think, is pretty obvious, right? When we get renewable energy, we're offsetting the need for polluting energy sources. And from a resilience standpoint, you get safety from having energy availability and reliability. So this is the trifecta that the Clean Coalition fights for every day. And I like this. I like these two ways of looking at it. So there's various configurations of solar and storage, and I'm going to just very quickly. You can have solar only, which is great for sustainability, but obviously you don't get any resilience from that because grid goes down, solar turns off. You could have storage only that allows you to time shift that solar energy. A lot like what Jan was talking about with the time coincident energy, and really making sure you're pushing a lot of that solar generation from the middle of the day out into the shoulders of the day and into the evening and night times. But that doesn't provide you any resilience either. Grid goes down, storage turns off. Actually, excuse me, the storage can stay on. The storage can stay on if it's configured to stay on. But if the storage is only time shifting energy, so the sustainability piece of storage depends on what type of energy is being used to put into the battery, because that's what you're getting back out. So you put green energy in, you get green energy out. You put brown energy in, you're going to get brown energy out. Solar plus storage basically combines solar and storage to deliver mostly economic and environmental benefits, but it has limited resilience benefits. If you don't have the solar and storage configured for a microgrid, then grid goes down, and both your solar and your storage turn off. A solar microgrid combines, to get this trifecta, the economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. And so it's really where the Clean Coalition focuses is on getting this trifecta. And then just in terms of the various types of microgrids, Al had talked about, how he defines the microgrid space. The Clean Coalition tends to define it a little bit simpler, right, with just a couple of variations. But in general, a microgrid is a combination of energy resources, definitely including generation. You have to have generation there to be a microgrid. They're coordinated to serve specific loads and definitely have to be able to island when the broader grid goes down. You can have a microgrid that's 100% off grid, but if it is connected to the grid ever, it has to be able to survive and operate when the broader grid goes down. A solar microgrid is a behind the meter microgrid that is solely relies on solar for the energy generation when islanded. A hybrid solar microgrid is a solar microgrid that includes additional sources of energy generation beyond just the solar. So if Jan was talking about some of the facilities that they're doing solar and solar microgrids at, and some of those facilities did solar only because they already had some type of backup generation, probably a diesel generator. Is the pretty typical solution that's out there. So, you can do a solar microgrid. You can take that diesel generator, put it into the solar microgrid design. You get a hybrid solar microgrid that allows you to basically, hopefully, never turn that diesel generator on again, other than to run through its maintenance sequence, which you have to do every couple of weeks. And it's nasty and polluting and all that during that time. But obviously, if you are minimizing the runtime, you're providing a benefit. And then if you do need to run it, you just run it long enough to make sure your battery's charged, and then the solar microgrid is the master, turns off that diesel generator. You minimize the runtime on that diesel. And of course, from the facility standpoint, if they really do want to have that redundancy and backup, having a certain amount of on-site diesel fuel supply that's going to last them 10 times longer, because you hardly have to ever have to run the generator, that's a good thing, right? So you do get this tremendous amount of additional resilience from a hybrid solar microgrid. And then kind of the big win, right, if we can get the utilities to participate, is a community microgrid. And that is a microgrid that covers a whole grid area, a target grid area, and relies on existing distribution feeders. That's why you need the need the utilities to participate, because you're using their wires. Community microgrids typically include both front of meter, which means on the utility side of the customer meter, and they also include behind the meter resources. So those are the types of microgrids in the Clean Coalition's world, and that's how we define them and think about them. And let's see. So I'm going to give a little background on storage resilience, value of resilience, and load management. These are all key elements of microgrids. I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. But again, these are available for people to download from the Clean Coalition website. They will be available starting Monday. And then if Sierra Club's wants to pass them around, no restriction on the Clean Coalition slides, mine or Ben Schwartz's, and Ben will be speaking after me. But this is basically, the look at a battery. So a battery has, a full, set of capacity. But you have to think about a couple of things. You have to think about operational life of the battery, which means how much of the state of charge you're going to cycle every day. You ideally don't want to take it down to 0, and you don't want to take it up to 100% if you can avoid it. You also need to think about your energy storage needs to be available for the most degradation you're ever going to get on that battery before you replace it. So typically the Clean Coalition is looking at 15-year lifetimes on a battery. And batteries, the energy capacity of a battery degrades by about 2% a year if you cycle the full battery state of charge once per day. So once per day cycling, you're going to have about 2% degradation of the energy capacity of the battery over a year. And if you're going to make that last for 15 years, you need to be prepared for 30% degradation at year 15, and you need to be designing for that, right? If you're looking for resilience, you need to design your resilience for 70% of your daily available capacity for cycling needs to provide that level of resilience you're designing for at year 15. So this is in terms of the amount of resilience you get from a solar microgrid. This is the resilience results for a solar microgrid that the Clean Coalition designed for University of California, Santa Barbara. And basically what this shows is if you have enough solar to net zero the site, and you put, for every kilowatt of solar, you put 2 kilowatt hours of energy storage on it, this is the amount of resilience you get. You can keep your critical loads on. And in this case, the critical loads are pretty typical at about 10% of the total loads. You keep those on forever. So the vertical axis here is percentage of load. Horizontal axis is percentage of time. And what this basically shows is that your tier 1 loads, which are your critical loads, they can stay on forever. The tier 2 loads, which are they are priority loads, you'll keep them on as long as you can without threatening the ability to keep your tier 1s on. And those are about 15% of the loads typically, and you keep those on for about 80% of the time. And the tier 3 loads, the remaining 75%, you keep those on even for at least 25% of the time. And it makes sense if you remember that I said you have enough solar to net zero the site, which means on an average day, you're generating as much solar on the site as you're consuming electricity on the site, right? So on an average day, we should be able to keep 100% of the load on. But you have to tier this a little bit to make sure you got some uncertainty coverage for your critical loads. Your critical loads are the ones that can never turn off. I'd always like to show this slide as well, because it looks like the same slide I just showed, but there's this red hashed rectangle there in the corner. That shows the amount of resilience you get from a typical diesel generator. A standard diesel generator implementation has only 2 days of fuel supply on site. If the grid outage lasts for more than 2 days, you're screwed, or you need to really hope that somebody's going to come and get you some more diesel fuel. But in a big disaster, that's not going to happen for most sites, because the diesel fuel is going to be restricted to very, super critical facilities if the roads are open and you can get, the diesel even to those facilities. But a typical diesel generator is sized for the tier 1 and tier 2 loads, so usually about 25% of the overall load for 2 days. So, if you look at the amount of area covered by that red, covered in that red hashed rectangle versus the amount of area covered in these colors, there's no comparison. A solar microgrid has an amazing level of resilience that completely overwhelms the amount of resilience you could possibly get out of a diesel generator. This is a lot of words. I just want to point you to the last 3 bullets on the slide. It's basically that just goes through the definitions of the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 loads with a little more wording. And I'm not going to go through that any further, but for those of you who want to look through this presentation on your own, there's a lot of information here. And for those of you who want to know the details about the value of resilience methodology that the Clean Coalition has developed, to standardize value of resilience across all types of facilities and all types of geographies. We call that the Value of Resilience 123 or VOR 123 methodology. And there's I've conducted a webinar on this topic. The link that's showing here, will get you there. You can download the presentation. You can watch the webinar if you want to, the recorded webinar. So if you're interested in value resilience and how solar microgrids deliver value resilience, this webinar is an excellent resource for you. And I'll just talk a little bit about load management. In order to, have this value resilience 123, the VOR 123 operationally, implemented, you need to be able to control loads. So your tier 1 loads, they're always on. So you don't actually have to control those because they're never going to turn off. But your tier 2 loads and your tier 3 loads, you have to be able to turn those on and off. So you have to have a load management strategy. And this basically shows the load management, or what we call a circuit flow diagram, which is how the energy goes from the entry point, where the grid comes in. And also that's the same point where the solar microgrid is feeding into the electrical system. And how you go from, kind of that energy source point to get energy to all of the loads across a campus. In this case, this is a high school in Santa Barbara called San Marcos High School. And this is the load management, the circuit flow diagram for that high school, for that solar microgrid at that high school, which we facilitated for the Santa Barbara Unified School District. I want to just make one point. This kind of ties in with something that Jan had mentioned, that, solar in the winter is, you have less solar generation in the winter. That's true. I think everybody, intuitively understands that. But I want people to start thinking vertically. Vertical installation of solar is actually maximized. So we're working on a project in Berkeley. It's a brand new project being designed. It's 100% affordable housing, 8-story building, all electric, net zero, will never pull energy off the grid between 4 and 9 p.m. and then has a solar microgrid. Critical loads will never turn off. And in fact, most loads will be operational 100% of the time, even when the grid is down for long periods. So this is what this basically shows is that if you put solar in a vertical configuration, like on the side of a building, as shown on the far left picture, you actually end up with this result that's highlighted in this bar chart. So I know there's a lot of information here, so just bear with me. The green bars, the far left bars in each of these clumps across the 12 months of the year, that is vertically deployed solar. And what's really noteworthy here is that vertically deployed solar, if it's south facing, the south facing vertically deployed solar gets higher generation. Vertically deployed solar will have higher solar generation in the winter months than it does in the summer months. So, kind of getting back to this concept of time coincident renewables to, applied to your loads. We need a way to get more renewables in the winter time, especially if we're talking about solar, and especially after we electrify and we have significant levels of heating loads that are going to turn into electric power. Think heat pumps for space heating and heat pumps for water heating, right? Those are big loads. We're going to need to have solutions for serving those loads in the wintertime. Vertical solar is a really key solution for achieving our future energy system. I know I'm going fast, so apologize about that, but these slides will be available. I want to make a couple points. I know we got a lot of people here who care about this clean energy future. A lot of people who are doing a lot of work on it and advocating. And I just want to make the point: getting things done equals aligning stakeholders, right? We've got to line up stakeholders in order to really get big progress. And when I talk about the stakeholders, right, these are the stakeholders that I'm talking about. You've got your property owners, where all these solutions are going to go. You've got your policymakers. You've got your utilities. You've got your community members, et cetera. You've got your financiers, solutions providers. I just want to point out that utilities are highlighted here for a reason. Usually, they are the toughest stakeholder to deal with. And so lots of innovation has to happen from our policymakers, because the utilities really aren't going to change the game that they benefit from very nicely right now. And Al covered this as well as anybody could. We need to have our policymakers step up and make sure that our utilities are moving the future in the direction that we really need it to move. I also want to make the point that there's a couple of things when you're dealing with stakeholders is that humans like to keep things simple, and all stakeholders at the end of the day are humans, right? So humans like to keep things simple. So keep things simple, right? Make sure that objectives and analyses are effectively presented, right? I try to use lots of color. Most of my slides have lots of color on them. This one doesn't really, but most of my slides do. Also, most humans are capitalists. At the end of the day, we've got this trifecta of economic, environmental, resilience. Economics is going to matter to almost everybody. And I don't care if you're talking to somebody who's a diehard environmentalist, when you push comes to shove, and I've worked with lots of those people, right? And I am one of those people. When it comes push comes to shove, they also care about the economics. So just remember, economics matter, and all the stakeholders are going to care about the economics in almost every case that I've ever been involved in. And then also, success requires multi-pronged action combined with courageous and relentless pursuit, right? And Al Weinrub is a perfect example of this, right? That is a person who has been fighting for these causes for decades and is courageous and will say, inconvenient and things that most people aren't going to have the courage to say. Solar microgrids for schools need support, and the program that Jan is doing with the solar and storage on public buildings, I totally applaud that. The Clean Coalition helped highlight that program when it was first announced, and the schools are going to need a lot of support. I'm going to tell you why. So. Okay, this is a solar microgrid methodology. I'm not going to go through this, but this is in the deck. This is the process that the Clean Coalition goes through when we work on solar microgrids. We got asked to help a school very recently, so this is very new information. They're probably not going to be able to get into NEM 2. Jan mentioned net energy metering 2. The existing version net metering is much more favorable to behind the meter assets than NEM 3, which is going to become effective on April 15th. And pretty much any project that gets started today or beyond is going to be a NEM 3 project. So NEM 3 is not going to be very rewarding to energy that gets exported to the grid. And what we're looking at in this slide is a really tremendous problem that schools have to make the economics work in a NEM 3 world. So the blue bars represent the amount of load that this particular school has, and this is pretty representative of all schools, right? It's not like this is any kind of special situation. This is a normal school situation. The loads are the blue bars, and the solar is in yellow. And we have this massive mismatch in the middle of the year, right? In the summertime, when the schools are mostly quiet and there aren't a lot of loads there, you're going to be generating your maximum amount of solar across the year, right? And it's just going to be exported to the grid. If you want to hit net zero, right, you're going to be exporting a boatload of solar during the summer times. Well, they're going to be getting reamed on this, massive reduction that's going to get compensated for the exported energy. So we need the CCAs to step up and create programs that are going to make sure that they're rewarding the schools for this NEM export that happens in the middle of the summer, which, by the way, is also when the CCAs are running into the biggest problem in terms of having grid constraints and congestion revenue, right costs, and local capacity requirement issues, right? So there's a lot of extra value for the CCAs in this time period as well, especially if we add a battery to it and we can time shift it and make sure that solar energy is getting exported in that 4 to 9 p.m. time frame when we have the most grid constrained situation. This just shows that pink line is the amount of solar that's getting exported to the grid. You can see in the summer months, right? You got a lot of pink there compared to where the load is. I don't have time to go into some of these other details. My apologies. Solar microgrids work really well for off-grid situations as well. This is a solar resource map for solar at an off-grid site that we were helping with. And I want to just come to this table real quickly. You can design for whatever level of resilience you want. It's just going to come down to the sizing your solar and your storage and how much it's going to cost, right? So it really just comes down to you can get 100% resilience, no problem. You just make your solar and your batteries big enough. period, right? And you can have all the resilience you can have 100% resilience. None of your loads will ever turn off. But you want to do it a little bit smarter than that. You don't want to spend $1 bazillion for your solution. You'd rather kind of be reasonable about your solar and your sizing storage, sizing and your solar and your storage. And then you just use some load management in there to do things that when you have flexible loads, like your water heating, make sure you're doing it when the sun is shining. And get an extra big water storage tank, right? That's thermal storage. That is a thermal storage solution as opposed to, electrical, chemical storage system like a battery. And then things like car charging, right? Charge your car middle of the day when sun is shining. Don't charge your car at nighttime when the grid is stressed and energy is the most expensive. And, there's a chance that there won't be energy available if you're in an off-grid situation to charge it. So I want to also really quickly bring up this concept of solar microgrids for grid-constrained load growth. This means this is a solution that we're working on right now for a farm that wants to add a massive amount of load for LED lights that will help their crops grow faster. And so just I know there's a lot of information on this chart, but basically you got your grid energies coming into a transformer that goes into the customer meter right here. The maximum load on this site right now is 291 kilowatts. Okay, that's the amount of load that's on the site right now. They want to add DC loads in the form of these LED lights of 2.5 megawatts, right? It's like almost, we're talking about 10 times more load, an order of magnitude more load compared to what they currently have. And so we've figured out a way to do that. The utility, which is Southern California Edison in this case, has said that the grid is too constrained. There's no ability to increase the service size to the site. And so we're going to be limited. So we can't upsize the service. And the maximum amount of the largest inverter size that we can connect to this system based on the service size is 530 kilowatts. And that's using a line side tap and doing some tricky things. So we can put a 530 kilowatt inverter here, and we can put as much solar and storage behind that inverter as we want, because for the interconnection process, all the utility cares about is how big the inverter is. Okay, and that determines how much energy you can push either way, right? Across that inverter, it can go from the AC side to the DC side or vice versa. So we've designed a situation where this solar microgrid is going to be massive, and it's going to largely serve all of that DC load, and it's all going to be behind that little 530 kilowatt inverter. So I'm really excited about the opportunity for this type of solution, and hopefully leaders like PCE will help enable this type of solution, because in addition to this situation where we're talking about adding a bunch of LED lights, that's relevant to this farm, but where we have something that's going to be relevant to almost everybody is in electrifying transportation. So I just got back from the schools conference. A lot of schools are electrifying their bus fleets. They're talking about adding these kind of ratios, increasing their loads by a factor of 10. A lot of those locations, a lot of those schools are going to be located in places where you cannot increase the service size to those schools because they're grid constrained in exactly the same way that this is. And in order to make sure that we get that EV bus charging happening on that site, we're going to need a solution just like what we've designed here for this farm in Southern California. This is some information. This just kind of goes through what their load looks like. I can't go into it. And I know I don't want to steal any time from Ben, because I think at the end of the day, Ben's going to be talking about the policy solutions that are needed to make microgrids, to really unleash microgrids. And, as far as I'm concerned, that is the most important thing we need to all be working towards. So I don't want to steal any time from Ben, but I will just say that there's a handful of additional slides in here that people are happy, hopefully people are interested enough to go look through these themselves. And my contact information is at the front slide of my presentation, and feel free to contact me if I can be helpful to projects and whatnot that you're working on. And other than that, I'm going to stop now before I start creeping into Ben's time. So thank you.
Our fourth speaker will tell you about the regulatory hurdles we have to jump over to get to a better world of microgrids and how we can reduce the number of hurdles. Ben Schwartz is a policy expert and represents the Clean Coalition in proceedings at the California Public Utilities Commission on microgrids, interconnections, net energy metering, and a lot more. Ben has a BS in public policy from USCB. Please welcome Ben Schwartz.
Great, thank you. Let me share my slides. All right, here we go. So today I will be discussing a little bit of history of microgrid policy, address why we don't have more microgrids, and then take a few minutes to consider what it will take to get more microgrids deployed throughout the state. So most of my slides are going to have a lot of text. That's kind of the nature of the policy game, but feel free to take a look at these slides afterwards. So just to start, I think Al provided this background, but I just want to go over it again, which is that our grid was designed with 20th century principles about the where power originates and how it should get to the end user. And so it's designed for remote generation, that it travels across long distance transmission lines before it's finally delivered via the distribution grid to the end user. And so this creates quite a few complications as our grid is transitioning from a one-way flow of energy to a bi-directional flow of energy. The first is that microgrids are unique configurations, particularly community microgrids, which rely on an area of the existing distribution grid. And configuring and optimizing the generation, storage, and software is certainly possible, but it requires a good amount of engineering time and collaboration on the part of all parties involved. The second issue is called Rule 218B of the Public Utilities Code, which is commonly known as the over-the-fence rule, which states that any entity transmitting energy that uses the existing distribution lines or crosses a public right-of-way must register as an electrical corporation. And this creates a significant regulatory hurdle because it means that any entity potentially that owns or wants to create a community microgrid would have to be subject to the same regulatory hurdles as the large investor-owned utilities. And the utilities have an army of lawyers that certainly would be very expensive for any other electrical corporation to hire. The next 3 bullet points are related to valuation of distributed generation and microgrids. Craig did a great job explaining the 3 values that microgrids provide in economic, environmental, and resilience. But resilience is currently not valued in any standard way, which makes it very difficult to create a business use case for microgrids, particularly larger community microgrids. Oftentimes when we talk with folks, right, they say that there is a huge value to keeping the lights on during an outage, whether that's, a store not having food spoil, or a critical facility being able to keep the lights on, or a fire station being able to keep the dispatch on. But when we ask what is that worth in terms of monetary value, the answer is kind of a shrug and I don't know. And that's generally been the approach that the regulatory agencies have taken. Just, we can start talking about microgrids and we'll focus and figure out a value of resilience later on. But the problem becomes that it's very difficult unless you have a sure way of creating a value stack and an economic use case for different types of microgrids. It's difficult to deploy them in a widespread fashion. And then the last bullet point is related to interconnection. Microgrids take a fair amount of time to deploy, particularly the more complicated they are. And so not having streamlined interconnection procedures to ensure that resources A will come online and B will come online in the same time frame that will ensure timely deployment of a microgrid makes it difficult for developers to want to undertake that investment in the first place. Okay, so during the 2017 and 2018 legislature, Henry Stern authored a bill, SB 1339, to commercialize the widespread deployment of microgrids. And these 6 numbers show what the bill requires. And The green sections are what the Public Utilities Commission has carried out in the 5 years since that bill was passed. And the red shows what has not yet been carried out. So there's a significant amount of red there. And clearly, there's a lot of work to be done, including how microgrids can affect policy goals, how they can benefit the grid, how they can operate in a current regulatory framework, and how they can operate in a grid of the future. And, in part, this is related to the CPUC, and in part, the legislation itself had some pitfalls. The three main issues that have led to inaction at the Public Utilities Commission are language surrounding cost shifts, a focus on utility-owned or controlled microgrids, which is essentially more of the status quo, and a focus on unintended consequences. And I will use the next couple slides to demonstrate exactly how this has occurred with some examples. So just to underscore what the Public Utilities Commission proceeding has done so far, there's been a lot of focus on single facility behind the meter microgrids. And so, I'll just leave this list here, but the Public Utilities Commission initially was focused on reliability issues and resilience in the face of summer wildfires. And the promise or the intent was that they would be able to pass solutions in time for summer 2020 and summer 2021. The proceeding got off to too slow of a start, so the only thing that ended up being approved was fossil fuel generation, although the commission said it was temporary, but they did not act quickly enough, and so they ended up approving more fossil fuel generation in 2021, adding the caveat that it was okay as long as the utilities presented a transition plan. And I think this has kind of been indicative of, the entire proceeding, right? It's been a little bit too slow. The solutions have been not broad enough. And while there has been time to make these solutions occur and actually create, swift regulation that could lead to the widespread deployment of microgrids, that has not necessarily been the case. I'll also just acknowledge that there have been 2 community microgrid programs passed, but those have taken a while to actually begin, and have not been significantly successful in any way. So the first example is how the focus on unintended consequences has resulted in very limited solutions. And this is a Rule 18 exemption, which governs the private resale of energy, and just says that facilities cannot share energy or resell energy from the grid. And so the proposed exemption was to help critical facilities gain resilience. And rather than making a blanket statement, the CPUC approved what can only be considered such a small exemption that it is almost not useful. So the properties must be adjacent, both must be critical facilities. Both critical facilities must be owned by different public agencies. The microgrids can only contain behind the meter assets, and the deployed microgrid cannot island during normal grid conditions. Energy can only be shared prior to or during an outage, meaning that frankly, the number of situations where this applies is probably in the single digits throughout the state. The second example is the Community Microgrid Enablement Program and the tariff surrounding it, the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff, which was initially started as a 2-year program budgeted at $60 million for PG&E alone, aimed at deploying community microgrids. And the program was intended at funding costs for utility upgrades. Now, it was designed using the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid, which is the first community microgrid in the state. And if you take a look at the image below, there is one microgrid that has reached step 11, which is stage execution or solution execution. And that is the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid. No other microgrid has been designed or come close. The issue here is that the process does not have enough certainty that a strong application will result in a deployed microgrid. And the results of a lack of certainty is that developers are either getting stuck in the beginning of the process or not choosing to participate at all. Now, the other two utilities did not have a community microgrid enablement program, and the state intended for the microgrid incentive program to provide the vast majority of funding. So there are $200 million which have been allocated to cover utility upgrade costs, as well as the cost of front of the meter energy storage. And this is an example of a potentially great program, but it's too slow. The program was initially approved in January of 2021, and the utilities released an implementation plan at the end of 2021. Here we are sitting in the middle of 2023, and the final microgrid incentive program plan was just passed this last Thursday. So it took over a year, almost a year and a half, just for the Utilities Commission to get their act together and pass it. And the program is not slated to open until the beginning of 2024, which would mean that potentially the first community microgrids could only be deployed close to 2027, which, if we need a significant resource build out and we need resilience before then, does not do much to help. Even though this money is being allocated to help disadvantaged communities, if the certainty is not there that projects can be deployed quickly, it's another program that potentially risks being ineffective. I'd also like to address multifamily housing. Multifamily housing represents what definitely should be a target area for governments and municipalities, in that most multifamily housing residents tend to be lower income and rent burdens, and they also generally do not have the autonomy to deploy their own solar storage or resilience solutions. Now, what is needed here is what's called a master meter, and that's because current multifamily housing programs like virtual net energy metering or SOMA require front of the meter installations for solar where it's allowed and storage. A master meter, which can be seen as the M in the image below where my mouse is a single meter that makes a building and all of the residential meters that are sub-metered appear as one facility. Therefore, a single grid isolation switch where the master meter is could turn this into a community microgrid, provisioning the entire area with resilience and allowing, in the event of outages, these residents to stay in place rather than relocating to a critical shelter site, an emergency shelter site. So the most important question is, what is needed to commercialize microgrids? And the broad general statement is, while microgrids can be complicated to deploy, and we do have existing policy that needs to be worked out, the state should invest money in low-hanging fruits. So for example, Craig discussed schools, emergency shelter sites, multifamily homes. Jan Pepper did a great job demonstrating a program for government buildings. And it's essential that we get our government buildings electrified and equipped with resilience as examples for the rest of our society. But also disadvantaged communities, which typically do not have high penetrations of distributed generation, as well as load pockets that are geographically isolated, rural areas, particularly those in high fire threat districts, where it costs a significantly larger amount of money to provide the same amount of energy compared to urban centers, for example. And then finally, areas that are reaching limits in hosting capacity. And Craig started to address this issue in relation to electrification, which is going to require a significant grid build out. The California Air Resources Board suggests that electrical demand is set to increase by 68% to get to our goals in 2040 and 2045, as well as areas where transmission upgrades are required. For example, Humboldt County recently found out that it would take between 12 and 15 years to get any new capacity in an extremely grid constrained area. And then finally, from the policy side of things, what is needed is first a standard value of resilience to value one of the main offerings and benefits that microgrids provide. A certain pathway to the development or for the development of community microgrids, what's called a tariff. And I won't go into it much, but the Clean Coalition has designed a resilient energy subscription model to deploy, enhance, and expand community microgrids in a way that benefits all parties that are involved. So please see the end of my slide deck for that. Streamlined interconnection, as well as considering existing externalities or non-energy benefits, which is to say that when you deploy distributed generation resilient solutions, the facilities where the microgrids are deployed benefit, but so does the broader electrical grid as well as the broader community. And monetizing those values are important to help the widespread deployment of microgrids. And then the last 2 points are, first, that proximity of a resource to the load it serves is very important. The state is in an unprecedented time where the cost of generating energy is now much less than the cost of delivering that energy to the end user. So having energy on site or close to on site will be much more effective than having transmission interconnected resources deliver energy from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. And then the last point is just, we need determinative programs. Developers need certainty, as well as the utilities need certainty that a strong application will receive support and receive collaboration and will result in a timely deployment of a microgrid. I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
Our final speaker started the Environmental Stewardship Program. She's an executive committee member of the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club and the founder of Bay Area Youth Climate Action. Sue Chow was a postdoctoral fellow and lecturer in sociology at Stanford University. She has a PhD in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA in history from Columbia University. Please welcome Dr. Sue Chow.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in this 8 webinar series. I'm not going to take very long. I will just talk about some key takeaways and suggestions that I hope people will think about. So first of all, just very quickly, the advantages of microgrids and decentralized energy systems are, the advantages are tremendous. First of all, resiliency, which people have already talked about. Rooftop solar systems with backup batteries, either standalone or connected to other units, and can detach from the grid during outages, and can feed energy into the big grid during grid shortages. It's just amazing what this can do to prevent blackouts. Also, of course, decentralized energy systems are much more secure. They minimize the chances of terrorists being able to bring down significant portions of our energy system. Energy efficiency, there's very little transmission loss. And speed to deployment, if there were not the tremendous regulatory barriers, it's much faster than building solar farms and wind farms. And it's also much more cost effective in the long run. And energy democracy, it will open the way for energy democracy in offering us an opportunity to break away from the old model of for-profit utilities control of centralized generation and transmission. This whole model that's driven by a business model that emphasizes increasing the cost of capital expenditures while minimizing investments in safety measures. And it will also open the door to moving towards a localized energy system with all the above advantages that we just talked about, plus governance by local communities motivated by serving the public good. So About the barriers, I think Ben, did a very good job in pointing out all the, regulatory barriers. I hope it doesn't demoralize people. Primarily the corporate control utilities allied with government agencies such as CPUC have been fighting decentralized energy systems each step of the way. Particularly those that they sense that they don't have, that they are not able to benefit from. And then, the primary regulations that stand in the way in California are regulations such as Rule 18 that prohibits over the fence, connections, meaning that it will be very difficult to share, energy. So they have tried to reform it a little, but just like Ben said, the changes have been very minuscule. Okay, and this is a problem that is present not only in our state, California, but also at the federal level. I mean, this is a battle that's being fought, there as well. There's an intense policy struggle between this, centralized, renewable energy people and the decentralized, proponents. It looks like the system could turn out to be a patchwork, that in certain areas they will stick to a centralized system, and in other areas like California, hopefully will turn towards decentralized systems with microgrids, speedily, so that California can become the national model. Of course, you have these different interest groups. Developers of large solar and wind farms want more, regional, connected grids, which environmentalists are fighting against. And the utilities want a lot more funding for their transmission lines because, they profit from those, every capital expenditure, they can push through, they stand to make a lot of money from. But, people should really think hard that speed is very important, speed to deployment, right? As I said earlier, long distance transmission projects, even without, regulatory barriers, take over 10 years, often 20 years, right? We just don't have the time. Whereas, microgrids, without regulatory barriers can be deployed in a matter of a few years, 2 to 3 years. So let me just talk a bit about some recommendations. We would really like to see CCAs and municipalities and public utilities take a primary role in building microgrids and decentralized energy systems. We would like to see them, be the main owners and managers of community microgrids and be able to negotiate with the businesses to set up arrangements whereby CCAs, municipalities, and public utilities can be the co-owners and co-managers of community microgrids. We also recommend the formation of a regional energy resilience group that would push for legislative reforms and funding for microgrids. And we would also like to see municipalities, CCAs, and public utilities streamline the rooftop solar installation process. There are a lot of apps now out that makes it very quick, for residents. And for environmentalists, we would highly recommend that you devote a fair amount of your energies to working on new policies in this area. Okay, so the final thing I would like to do is to show you a microgrids resolution that the Loma Prieta chapter just recently passed. I'm not going to read it, but it's a very short resolution that we would like cities and counties to adopt. It just talks about the importance of decentralized, energy systems. And also we would like to see them under the governance of CCAs, municipal utilities, etc. So I'm going to send this to everyone. And we would like very much to see, cities adopt a version of this. I know that resolutions are just symbolic, but it's important that we start, somewhere. Making a symbolic commitment is important. Okay, the last thing is just some housekeeping information. Let me bring this up. Note that the next webinar is on May the 6th, and it will be on electrification. And also, please note that there will not be in-person Saturday meetings because of insufficient demand, and we had some problems with the rooms. Okay, for people who are interested in working on a project, the next meeting is on April the 13th, Thursday at 4 p.m. A Zoom link will be sent to you soon. If you already have a project in mind, please get in touch with us via email or phone, and we can start a conversation as soon as possible. And the April project meetings are, the first one, as I said, will be on April the 13th at 4 p.m. and then April the 20th, Thursday at 5 p.m. and April the 27th, Thursday at 4 p.m.
Well, and thanks everyone for participating and providing all those questions. We didn't have the time to answer all of them, but I will answer all the questions online, and there will be a file that you will find on the environmental stewardship websites after this webinar is finished. And a week from now, the recording will be online, along with a sort of a multiple choice test that participants who are taking part in the certification program can use. So until then, we'll see you on May 6th, and when we will be talking about buildings, especially net zero carbon buildings. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye all.